It was a quiet afternoon in the village. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky with a golden hue, while the air smelled of grass and earth after a light drizzle. Children usually played outside at this hour, their laughter echoing through the narrow lanes. But today, something unusual was about to unfold, something no one could have imagined. In the middle of a small yard sat a baby, not yet able to walk on his own. He was dressed in a soft blue outfit, his round cheeks glowing in the fading light. Around him scurried tiny yellow chicks, fragile, restless, and endlessly curious. The baby's wide eyes followed them with fascination, his little hands clapping whenever one came too close. At first, it looked like nothing more than an innocent moment, a child surrounded by harmless little creatures. The baby leaned forward, tilted his head as though he understood something, and whispered. The words were so faint, so tender, that even the wind seemed to pause to listen. And what followed left everyone who witnessed it absolutely speechless. This was not just a child playing with chicks. This was something deeper, a story that would forever remain etched in the hearts of those who saw it. That morning had begun like any other, calm, predictable, and ordinary. The villagers were busy with their daily tasks, fetching water, preparing meals, and tending to the animals. But in one corner of the yard, the baby was restless. His mother noticed that he wasn't behaving like usual. He wasn't laughing at the rustling leaves or giggling at the fluttering birds. Instead, he sat quietly, gazing at the ground, almost as if waiting. His mother assumed he was tired and left him near the garden where the chicks were pecking at the soil. The baby reached out to them with an unusual calmness, not with playful shouts, but with silence. The chicks, too, seemed strangely drawn to him. Instead of scattering away, they slowly gathered around him. Their tiny wings fluttered, but they didn't try to escape. They circled him, curious yet calm, as though sensing something beyond the ordinary. A soft breeze swept across the yard, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. The baby's eyes sparkled as though he was waiting for this exact moment. The villagers nearby didn't pay attention. After all, what could a baby and a few chicks possibly mean? But for those who would later recall this day, it all started with that silence. The silence was not heavy. It was expectant, like the pause before a song begins. The mother looked once more at her child, smiling faintly, and went inside to finish her chores. She did not know that her baby's gentle gaze was about to spark something beyond explanation. The yard grew quieter, except for the soft chirps of the chicks. The baby leaned closer, placing both hands on the ground. His lips moved faintly, forming sounds not quite words, yet strangely intentional. A whisper escaped him, carried by the breeze. For a moment, the chicks froze. Their little black eyes blinked rapidly, and their chirping stopped. It was as though they had understood. The baby whispered again, longer this time. One chick stepped closer, brushing against his tiny foot. Then another followed, pecking softly at the edge of his dress. The circle around him grew tighter. It was no longer a random gathering. It was a response. The air thickened with suspense. The baby smiled, eyes glowing with a strange, innocent wisdom. No adult was there to see this yet. But when they would, their world would change. The whisper of a child had awakened something silent in nature. The bond between human and creature had crossed into the unseen. The moment felt like destiny itself unfolding on bare soil, and the first chapter of a mystery had just been written. What could a baby possibly say that chicks would understand? The answer was yet to come. The chicks did not scatter like they usually would when approached. Instead, they began to move in unison, tiny feet tapping the ground in rhythm. The baby giggled softly as though he had been waiting for this reaction. His eyes twinkled, his little hands clapped once, and the chicks chirped in response. To an onlooker, it might have looked like a simple coincidence. But those who would later hear the story swore it was no accident. One chick, the smallest of all, jumped onto the baby's lap without hesitation. The baby whispered again, his voice barely audible, but his tone full of warmth. The chick nestled against him as though comforted by the sound. Slowly the other chicks began to mimic the same movement. One after another they crept closer, not with fear, but with trust. Their soft chirps grew louder, echoing like a tiny choir. The baby tilted his head upward, as though hearing something beyond what anyone else could. He babbled faintly the way infants do, yet every syllable seemed to hold meaning. The chicks responded with a flurry of wings. Some began circling him faster, others sat calmly by his side. It was as though he had become their center, their little sun around which they revolved. The baby smiled and leaned forward again. Another whisper slipped through his lips. The air stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. Suddenly, the chicks lifted their heads in unison. Their tiny beaks opened, and they let out a chorus of chirps louder than ever before. It was sharp, piercing, and oddly synchronized. The sound carried across the yard, reaching the villagers nearby. Some paused their work, confused at the sudden uproar. A few even walked toward the sound to see what had happened. And when they reached the yard, their jaws dropped. The baby sat calmly, as though he had called them. The chicks formed a circle around him, chirping louder, their wings trembling with unusual energy. The villagers exchanged nervous glances. Was this play, or was it something else? The mother rushed back, worried her child was in danger. But when she saw him, her steps froze. The baby's lips moved again, whispering softly. The chicks stilled instantly, silence falling like a curtain. Then, in perfect rhythm, they bowed their heads. The villagers gasped. The chicks had responded as though obeying a command. And the baby? He only smiled. No one could explain it. But they knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. That night, the villagers could not stop talking about what they had seen. A baby whispering and chicks responding like trained creatures. It was unbelievable. Some dismissed it as a trick of chance. Others swore they had felt a shiver down their spine. The mother sat quietly, holding her child, unable to erase the memory. She replayed the moment again and again. His lips moving, his eyes glowing, the chicks bowing. Could her baby really have spoken to them? He was too young, barely able to form proper words. Yet, whatever he had said, the chicks had understood. The thought both comforted and frightened her. Days passed, and the chicks continued to behave strangely. Whenever the baby was near, they gathered instantly. They followed him around, pecking gently at his steps. They ignored other villagers, but to him, they were drawn like shadows to light. The villagers began to murmur. Some said the child was blessed, touched by something divine. Others whispered of omens and signs. "Animals know what humans do not," one elder said, shaking his head. "If they bow, it is because they recognize a soul greater than ours." Fear mingled with awe in the air. Each time the child whispered, the chicks grew restless. Their sounds were not ordinary chirps. They were rhythmic, like responses. Some even claimed they heard words in the patterns of the chirps. The mother grew protective, worried what people might think, but she could not stop the bond between her baby and the chicks. One evening she tried keeping him inside while the chicks pecked outside. The moment he cried, the chicks cried too. Their shrill sounds pierced the air until the door was opened, and the instant he was placed near them, they calmed again. It was undeniable now. The baby and the chicks shared something unseen, something that defied logic, something that scared some and fascinated others. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The villagers began keeping watch. They wanted to see what else might happen, because the whispers of a child had already stirred the whispers of an entire village, and deep down everyone sensed it. This was not an ordinary child. The secret was only beginning to unfold. As days passed, the bond between the baby and the chicks only grew stronger. Wherever he was placed, they followed. Whenever he cried, they cried, and when he whispered, they responded as though they were listening to a secret language only they could hear. The villagers could no longer ignore it. Some were curious, others frightened. One day, a group of elders decided to test what they had seen. They gathered in the yard, forming a circle around the child. They wanted to know if this was real or merely a string of coincidences. The mother was hesitant, holding her child close, but the whispers of the people pushed her to agree. She gently placed him on the ground where the chicks were waiting. The baby looked around, sensing the eyes upon him. For a moment, he sat silently, as if he understood this was different. Then slowly, his lips moved again. His whisper flowed into the air, so soft that even the elders had to lean in to hear. And once more, the chicks responded. They didn't just chirp this time, they formed a perfect circle around him, facing outward as though guarding him. Their tiny bodies stood between the baby and the watching crowd. The elders gasped. One of them whispered under his breath, "This is no ordinary child." Others stepped back in fear, uncertain whether they had witnessed a blessing or a curse. But one thing was undeniable. The chicks had chosen him, and he had chosen them. That night, the village was restless. Stories spread like wildfire. Some said the baby had a gift, a connection to life itself. Others feared he carried a curse, one that might bring disaster if misunderstood. But the baby was unaware of all these worries. He only knew the joy of tiny feathers brushing against his skin, the warmth of soft chirps filling the air, and the comfort of knowing he was never alone. Then came a night when the wind howled strangely, carrying with it a storm unlike any the village had seen in years. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and thunder shook the earth. The villagers rushed to protect their homes and animals, but in the chaos the chicks ran loose. The mother panicked, searching for her child. But before she could find him, the storm grew fiercer, lightning splitting the sky. And then, in the middle of the yard, she saw him. The baby was sitting calmly in the pouring rain, surrounded by the drenched chicks. His lips moved again, a faint whisper carried away by the storm. To her astonishment, the chicks did not scatter. Instead, they pressed closer to him, forming a shield with their tiny bodies. Every flash of lightning, every clap of thunder, and yet the baby remained untouched, smiling faintly as if whispering to the storm itself. The villagers watched in stunned silence. For a moment it seemed as if the storm itself had bowed before the innocence of the child. When morning came, the storm was gone. The sky was clear, washed clean by the rain, and the village lay quiet, damp, and broken. But one sight remained in everyone's memory. The baby and the chicks sitting unharmed in the middle of the yard, as if the night had been nothing more than a dream. The villagers gathered, and once again the child whispered. This time his voice carried more than just innocence. It carried peace. The chicks, soaked but alive, lifted their heads and chirped in unison, their sound echoing through the valley like a song. And then it happened. Every single chick bowed its head. One by one, as though obeying a higher command, they lowered themselves before the baby, surrounding him in reverence. The villagers gasped, their hearts trembling with both fear and awe. The mother rushed forward, lifting her baby into her arms. She felt his tiny heart beating calmly against her chest. The chicks scattered then, but only after one last collective chirp, as though saying farewell to a secret only they and the baby understood. The whispers had ended, but their meaning lingered. A baby had spoken, and nature had listened. Time passed, and the story of that day became a legend in the village. Some remembered it with awe, others with fear, but no one ever forgot it. The baby grew, his bond with the chicks fading, as childhood changed into years of learning and responsibility. Yet the villagers always looked at him differently, as though they knew he carried something they could never explain. The mother often sat quietly, recalling that day. She never spoke of it too often, for she feared people would twist its meaning. But deep in her heart, she understood the truth. The innocence of a child had touched even the smallest of creatures. His whisper had been nothing more than pure, untainted kindness, and nature had responded in the only way it knew how. The chicks had bowed not to power, not to fear, but to love, a love so pure it could silence storms and unite life itself. There are moments in life when we are reminded that true power does not come from strength, wealth, or knowledge, but it comes from innocence. The baby had no words, no intentions to control or command. All he carried was a heart untouched by malice, a soul unbroken by the world. And that purity alone was enough to reach beyond the barriers of language, beyond the walls between species, and into the very rhythm of nature itself. The chicks did not bow to a child because of fear. They bowed because they recognized something we often forget as adults: the silent force of love. Love that does not demand. Love that does not judge. Love that simply exists. In the end, it was not a miracle of whispers, nor the mystery of an unknown power. It was the oldest truth of the world. Kindness is understood by all living things. A soft word, a gentle touch, a heart that gives without expecting. These are languages that birds, animals, even storms can hear. The villagers learned that day that innocence holds more wisdom than years of experience. The mother realized her child was not extraordinary because of magic, but because of his purity. And the baby? He taught everyone, without even knowing it, that the smallest soul can carry the greatest lesson. So, remember this. When we speak with kindness, the world listens. When we live with compassion, even the smallest creatures respond. And when we hold on to the innocence we once had as children, we discover that we too can whisper to the heart of nature. And it will answer. And it will answer.